And good morning, everybody. It's Friday. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Really, really happy that you're here for this live stream. We are on LinkedIn and YouTube simulcasting. And my name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. Super glad to have you here. One of the things that we love to do on this, and what you'll see, is that we've built this really great community around food safety. So please, in the comments, let us know, say hi, where in the world you're at, which is always amazing to me. I'm in Loveland, Colorado, which is just north of the Denver area. We're in for a beautiful weekend here. And today I'm very, very happy to have my friend, Dr. Darin Detwiler, on with us in California, where it's 7 a.m. So Darin, thanks for getting up early to be with us. Greatly appreciated.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here.
And if you're new to the show here, this is kind of a unique format, and it's a ton of fun. We love doing this. We talk about different food safety topics, but it's not a lecture, right? We're not sitting here going through PowerPoints and all this crazy stuff. I love to have experts like Darin on to talk about a topic and really dive deep into it and get people thinking about different topics. And that's always what makes this just an absolute ton of fun. And part of that, right, is having these discussions. And good morning, well, I guess good afternoon, Stephanie, over in beautiful Germany. Nice to see you this morning. So part of this, right, is having that discussion. So we really, really encourage this as well. And if you want to continue the discussion, I put in the link here up above. There's a community group called Locals, which is free. And I post in there on recalls and different things that catch my attention. If you'd like more insights from me and copies of videos and documentation and what have you, there's a membership area you can join as well too. So greatly encourage you to do that. It's a ton of fun. So part of what we do, and Darin and I always do this, is I want to jump right into the topic. But as anybody who knows, who's been with the chat, is please join us for a nice little ceremonial drink with us. Wonderful, wonderful. Kimberly, hello from Florida. Hope you're having a great day. So let's jump into this. This is a fun one. So part of the behind the scenes here with the show is what we'll do is we'll have a prep call earlier in the week where we'll kind of chat over. And easily, I think we were probably talking, hour and a half on this topic. And we easily could have kept going just on the preparation for this, because I think it's so important. And today is really, I think, an interactive one, and it's meant to be a topic where we want you to think about this, because we don't have the answers on this necessarily, right? These are just ideas and bullet points and things that I think as an industry, we need to be considering. So good morning, Austin. Good morning, Dawn. Farmville, North Carolina. Sounds wonderful. So part of this, right, is to have this conversation. And what this really comes down to is kind of two phases, Darin. And really that first phase is kind of the introspective piece, right? We spend a lot of time talking about food safety, and we have audits and programs and procedures and third-party companies that come in and look at our facilities, and FDA shows up, or USDA comes in to audit us, right? And we go to conferences and we talk with other people in the industry, and we're doing all these type of things. And as we were talking about this, this is all kind of internal, isn't it? We're talking amongst ourselves most of the time, aren't we?
Well, we need to do this, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with what we're doing here in terms of having these conversations, but we have to make sure that if we're talking about a food safety culture, and the idea of the reason for a food safety culture is to make sure that consumers are protected, right? We got to look at a couple things. I mean, to one extent, the CDC estimates of 48 million Americans become sick, 128,000 are hospitalized, and some 3,000 die every year. Those really haven't changed over time.
Right.
With all the changes in science and technology and laws and policies and the incredible work that's being done by so many people, how come we haven't changed these numbers? And we look at how there are various disruptions, whether it be new technologies involved in making foods, or new ways in which people are getting foods. We have uh, uh, Uber Eats, and we have third party shopping, we have meal kits, we have direct to consumer delivery from companies, things that are really taking us away from that traditional brick and mortar retail and restaurant. The foundations upon which so much of our policies and systems were constructed. So really kind of focusing on the consumer, and um, as a missing piece, if you will. There are a lot of events I go to, and I see people, um, a lot of times the same people, and it's great to be around this community. um, you have your academics, you have your industry leadership, you have your people that sell services, people that sell products, people that publish research and news, and but I don't see a lot of consumer, like purely consumer representation. And to kind of put things into perspective, um, I before uh, uh, before I got involved in food safety, I was in the Navy. I was on a submarine, and of all the things, a lot of the submarine protective systems and gears were actually from the mining industry.
Oh.
I don't know how that happened. And along the ways, after I was in the military, I was a history teacher, a high school history teacher, and I would point something out that I didn't realize would become relevant here later. I'd ask my students to, and pretend you're one of my students, right? You're going to go into a coal mine. Back in the days when people got all dirty and worked in coal mines, and you put on your hat, right? You got your miner's light, the lamp on your head, right? And you got your trusty rusty pickaxe, and be
Uh-huh.
careful because again it's rusty. But then you'd have a guy who would be holding this wire cage, and as they go into a cave,
Mhm.
in that cage would be a canary. And this canary, right, its systems were such that it wasn't able to process the environment the same as a healthy human adult could. If there was too much carbon dioxide in the coal mine, um, that canary in the mine shaft would die, and that would be a signal to the humans that they gotta
Yeah.
get out of there, right?
Yeah.
um, this is, I think, something I reflect on a little bit, because when we look at outbreaks, by and large, we don't have an outbreak based on, hey, we're going to have we're going to recall this, or we're going to have a problem this today, for no indicators. We look at indicators, and these are typically triggered by the actions of county health departments when they realize that there are enough consumers that have reported, clinically proven, or just reported information that there is a pattern of illness, there's a pattern of harm here. And so in a way, consumers become that canary in the mine to
Mhm.
most of that reactive work in the world of food safety, when we look at outbreaks and recalls. So we can recognize this and say, look, if everything is based on making sure we protect the consumers, and if most reaction is based on consumers who are being harmed, we need to make sure that we're truly not only including the true burden of disease as a conversation piece within the context of food safety, but how can we be proactive and try to include consumers as much as possible in this notion of a food safety culture?
Mhm. No, absolutely. And I think that reactionary piece of it is spot on, right? And so every year, I mean, when FDA comes out with their top findings for recalls for next year, right? It's going to be the same, right? It's going to be okay. Well, which pathogen is going to take the lead? Is it going to be Salmonella or Listeria, or is something else going to show up? We're going to have a lot of allergen recalls, and we're going to have a lot
Hmm.
of foreign material recalls, right? Those are going to be the top three. And to your point, I think you're 100% right. It's all reactionary. It's, oh, something happened. Now let's, after the fact, go back and try and clean up the mess. Okay, well, let's just move on and wait for the next mess. And man, is that inefficient. You're never going to improve, right? We all know that from our day-to-day lives as quality managers in plants, right? If you think that if you're working in a plant and fighting fires all day long is your only role, and you go home at night, you think you've done a good job, you haven't, right? You need to work on improving and preventing those things from happening in the first place. And I know from experience, right? The consumer side of things, right? Getting that information back is really hard because part of it, to your point, Darin, is we all know from personal experience, because this is kind of a unique situation, right? We're working in this industry, but we're also consumers, right? We're eating food, we're drinking beverages every single day. And we rely on these systems too. So we have that perspective, but we tend to discount it, right? So a consumer contacts the company and says, "Hey, I had your product and it made me sick." Really? Did you? You know, a lot of people just think it was the last thing you ate, and these type of things. And so I think a lot of times the mindset is going about disproving that the consumer really got sick by your product, right? It's something else. You're just blaming it on me because you think that's the way it is. Um, and to your point, if I'm sick right now, I get food poisoning, I just fight through it and stay in bed, and you're like, oh, that sucked, and you move on. You don't go to the doctor, you don't get samples, you don't have it sent in for typing, you don't report it to the CDC, right? None of these things happen, and that linkage doesn't work very well on getting that feedback to the manufacturing facilities. That consumer voice, it is very muted.
Well, I think that, when I talk with families who are dealing with either a child in the hospital or the death of a child, or something along that lines, it's as if this is the first time they've ever dealt with this, and they've had to have these conversations and think about these things. But for some of us who've been in the food safety arena, if you will, for me, it's nearly 30 years. It becomes this seemingly endless cycle of crisis and reform.
Right.
And at some point, you keep looking at it and going, okay, but things have changed. I remember around 2015, two things happened. One is that uh, the numbers of outbreaks and victims, collecting some data, started to look as if it was more so now shifting from being caused by foods regulated by the USDA to being caused by foods regulated by the FDA.
Mm.
And as you can, well, the FDA is actually responsible under their regulatory authority for some 85% of foods, whereas the USDA is looking at meat and poultry. You can look at how the USDA had policy response after 1993, and you had to wait until 2010. President Obama signed into law FSMA, and 2016 FSMA began implementation. And even some of FSMA has not yet been implemented 100%. And that's all under the FDA. Another thing that started happening was, again, around 2014, I believe, was that the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, or something like that, their data was showing that Americans were spending more money on food prepared outside of the house than they were spending on food prepared inside the house. Now they may eat it inside the house, but we're talking meal kits and restaurants, bars, wherever it is. So this shift in where Americans' dollars were going. Right now, we can also look at another shift that's coming on right now in terms of convenience. This idea of um, foods that are being prepared in ghost kitchens, foods that are like the meal kits, and this kind of convenience factor is being looked at as. I just saw this data yesterday. It's currently about a $40 billion industry, and within the next 5 years, it's looked at as being over $70 billion industry.
Mm.
And one of the recent surveys showed that um, millennials interviewed, and I'm not picking on millennials, this is just what the review showed, is that millennials are tending to prefer convenience over even taste and quality.
Wow.
And so we have some changes in industry, but we also have changes in consumer behavior that we have to take into consideration in terms of these bigger picture concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. And we tend to think of the consumer, right, as this monolith, right, and they're all the same. It's the general population. We'll just kind of look at it that way, and that's completely wrong, right? We're all individuals. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, allergenic reactions. We may have just gotten back from a hospitalization, right? And our personal risk profile changes
Mhm.
as we age, right? So
Oh yeah,
the risk of me as a child or me as an elderly person completely different than me now, right?
right.
So part of that is taking that into consideration, and Austin is hitting on this, and this is part of what we're talking about today. Austin, is how do we bring that education to the general population, right? Because part of it in the US, and I've talked about this before on the show, is that we have this built-in assumption around food safety that it's always safe, right? And pretty much we can do whatever the hell we want to it, so that meal shipment that shows up on our doorstep can sit there for 8 hours over the course of a 100-degree day, and it's going to be fine, right? But what's interesting, and Darin and I were talking about this and prepping for this, is even where you're at in the world, that changes, right? So if I go on vacation in a foreign country, depending on what that country is, my guards go up big time. Right now, I'm not drinking the water. I'm not eating any fresh vegetables. I'm going to pass on the salad. I'm having the medium well steak. Those type of things. Right, your guards go up, and part of that is how do you bring that dynamic? And part of this is, I'll be curious to get your take on this as well too, Darin. Is when I look at food safety plans, I'm out auditing or helping company put together revisions to their plans and things like this. And you get to the section that you describe your product. It's like, okay, here's our product, here's the pH range, here's the water activity, here's the ingredient statements, here's the allergen profile, and here is the consumer. And every single time, I've not seen an exception to this, it always says our product is for the general population.
Yeah. Well, the general population, like you said, not only has it changed, but we have to take into consideration that um, the average American or the average adult, we don't need to see American, but the average adult is going to have an immune system that can withstand so many different things. Um, but there's some caveats here. One is that we look at the most vulnerable populations, the very young, the elderly, those with a compromised immune system, could be from everything from surgery to COVID to cancer to a whole slew of different things, and pregnancy, right?
Mhm.
So those are the ones who are most likely to be sick enough where it's reported, where they're hospitalized, and where we're talking about deaths here. And so when we talk about general population and we look at most people to whom a foodborne illness is just an inconvenience, it's very hard to get that kind of larger buy-in. But whether it's because of the pandemic or because of economics or whatever, you have families that adult children are living with their parents, or you have multi-generational families living together, and now you have a household where you like it's this whole, like, you could literally have the toddler, the compromised immune system, the pregnant woman, and the elderly all in the same household. And so
Yeah.
you can't go, well, we're going to take the path of the least limiting option in terms of our food choices here. Maybe you got to start thinking in terms of the most critical, the most limiting option. And if your food safety plans, your allergen controls, your sanitation protocols are designed to make the assumption that the most vulnerable population, the most vulnerable consumers are your target audience, you're just going to benefit the general consumer,
Mhm.
because you're taking the most conservative path in terms of, again, food safety. And
Right.
so when we have this label, and we've heard it, we've all heard this, and we've been faced with this for so long. America has the safest food supply in the world. That's great. That's great, but we can't hide behind a label. We have a responsibility, and perhaps that responsibility involves us kind of rethinking food safety culture,
Mhm.
to incorporate and consider being a little bit more consumer driven or consumer first. And there's another benefit from this, kind of, when we look at reactive versus proactive. If we're more proactive in terms of food safety culture and consumers, not only are we going to perhaps hit more audiences and have more bang for our buck with that messaging, we're also going to be perhaps early preparing future workforce, people who enter the workforce, whether it's in retail, a restaurant, or working in the food industry, or becoming a food, industry executive or whatever. If they're not joining the workforce and now hearing food safety messages for their first time, that could make a significant impact.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, part of this too, right, is that consumer awareness piece of it, right? And to Austin's point, how do you get that message out there? The other side is the business side. So to your point, um, if you're being very conservative in your food safety plans and thinking about those high risk groups, right, you're gonna have a better food safety plan. Um, and also on that side, and something that I would always do in the companies I work with, is you're always looking for new markets, right? And so the sales guys are going out and they're like, oh, we need a new kids product, or we should start selling into commissaries, and let's start selling into old folks' homes, and let's start selling into the schools, right? They're, on that food service side, those are big markets, right? And the company needs to understand it's like, oh, okay, hold on a minute here. All right, so we're going to start deliberately targeting children with our products. That's a higher bar, right? We need to take that into consideration. And to your point, if you're already addressing that bar, you're good, right? If you're covering those contingencies. And we're seeing this now with these new emerging threats with different types of bacteria, right? So look what the infant formula business is figuring out with Coronabacter. Bacteria aren't static, right? They're always figuring out, from an anthropomorphic standpoint, new ways to attack us, and that's never going to change, right? So if you're considering those groups, you're going to be much better off.
Well, I think, so much of food is based on brand, trust, reputation. People, for instance, I don't normally drop names, but if someone's going to get macaroni and cheese, they're like, oh, I want Kraft macaroni and cheese. You know what I mean? They want
Mhm.
and it's not because of the color of the box. It's because it's a specific taste profile they want, right?
Mhm.
And it's weird how the conversations around food, and a lot of it doesn't even have anything to do with food safety. We have brand trust and reputation that are often changing out there because some company's CEO makes some racist statements, or they invest in or oppose some political issue, like breastfeeding in the restaurant, or gender neutral restrooms, or something, and they don't even have anything to do with food safety, right? There are places I remember being in this conversation about when you have so many senior citizen and assisted living communities, and that a lot of these realize that it's their adult children that are making some of these economic decisions to help their parents live in there, and they'll have like a Starbucks by the office kind of a thing, because that appeals to the adult children. But no one who actually lives there would ever go near a Starbucks. They just want their
Right.
$25, or 25 cent, hopefully, cup of coffee kind of a thing. So
You
when
want
we
$6 for a cup of coffee? What?
Yeah. So at the universities, they're always pushing like a meal plan. It's X amount of dollars. It's a big ticket, to get your kid who's going off to college a pass so they can have all their meals, because parents are worrying, are my kids going to get to eat enough? But there's
Mhm.
also a lot of times where parents are, what do you do to make sure that your food is safe? And I don't want just, junk food kind of a thing when I send my kid off to university. So people are asking questions. How do you make sure that food is safe? And I don't think that it would hurt if you have a company that wants to make a cereal for kids or meals for kids, for that company to come out and say, this is what we do to make sure that this intended audience is extra safe with these foods. This is their we've heard this phrase that food safety is not competitive.
Mhm.
um, and I do think that's actually a misnomer. I do think that food safety is competitive to some nature. But why couldn't, in a world of disruptors, right? Oh, it's this color. Oh, it's using this technology. Oh, it comes in this kind of packaging. Why couldn't someone say, look, we take into consideration children as our consumers, and we do this extra step to make sure that it's just extra safe? Why couldn't food safety be seen as that that characteristic, that disruptor, if you will, that behind that brand, and really help build that trust behind that? There are examples out there. There's a company that um, I've worked with. They really had they had an incident a number of years back where they had a breakdown in their allergen control. There was a mix up in the kitchen behind the scenes kind of a deal, and a consumer got sick, and the company brought that girl and her mom, back to the restaurant and had a training and even put together a video that helps make sure that employees understand what happens when someone is impacted by this allergen. The leafy green marketing, LGMA, after the 2006 romaine lettuce outbreaks, they worked with Stop Foodborne Illness and put together a video with some victims to really emphasize the why behind food safety and what they do. There are great examples out there of companies that really do interact with victims and with consumers to make sure that they get it right the next time.
Yeah, exactly. Good. I mean, part of this, right? And so Austin, who's on our chat here with Sage Media, does a great job with that messaging, right? Because teaching via PowerPoint, yeah, it doesn't work, right? And we don't sit down to watch TV and watch PowerPoints, right? We watch a story, right? And how that story is told and evolves, and we become part of that.
Mhm.
And I think part of it too, Darin, is with food safety, right? We have this neat little box that we have, and we say, oh, okay, I'm here at this production facility, and I have these ingredients that come in, and I need to check those, and I get my processes, and I need to manage those, and it's got to be shipped out just right. Okay, I'm done. Right. What happens after that point? I think this is too, right? This overlays with enhanced traceability, because FDA is saying we need to be able to go backwards through that chain. Just because you're thinking of it forwards, that's not how recalls work. It's backwards. So how can we make that better? And they're right. But I mean, part of this is that whole assumption that food is safe. And an interesting little factoid here. I love these little random pieces of information that are absolutely useless. Um, Next time you're in the store and you're in the cereal aisle, and obviously, dry cereals, are marketed toward children. Look at when they have those mascots on the boxes. Look at how the eyes are positioned. If you'll notice, the eyes are generally looking down. They're looking down at the children, trying to get the children's attention.
I remember reading about that. You know what else I
Yeah.
read along that line is that there was this university study that looked at like convenience stores and some places liquor stores, different places, and they found that this was a number of years back. They found how many they were looking at placements of sign for alcohol and cigarettes. It was all like below countertop level, kind of a thing, and where those places. So it's interesting that here you've talked about how, right? How we tell stories. We've looked at where the eyes are looking, where the placements are, but there's also that question of when, right?
Mm.
When did Chipotle start talking about food safety?
After they had a
After,
problem.
right? Why don't we? And I can go down the list, and it's always after. Imagine a scenario where companies start talking about food safety. Um, you know, I wouldn't say before, because that would imply that then there was going to be an outbreak. But what if we talk about this, but not after the fact? What if it's part of our normal conversation? The idea of food safety should always be on the menu. Food safety should always be on the table. Food safety should always be on our mind. Therefore, food safety should always be talked about, not simply as a on advice of my counsel, kind of a situation, right? In
Yeah,
front of a camera when there's no other option. I guess we have to talk about food safety.
exactly. It's like, we've been forced into this, right? I mean, because part of it, right, is like, yeah, internally, imagine if you were to have this conversation in the company, right? So I'm the head of food safety in the company, and I go to senior leadership and say, hey, listen, we have amazing food safety programs in our company. We're world class. We're leading the way. Let's start talking to the consumers about that, right? Every lawyer in that meeting is going to go, whoa, whoa, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa. What you want to do? What? Do you realize how you're going to increase our liability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Lawyer language.
Opening a can of worms.
Yeah, of course we have good food safety. There's no reason for us to go out and advertise that, because what if something goes wrong, and what if, right? And the lawyers are there to protect the company, right? They want to make sure that the company, that's their duty, right? That's their responsibility within the organization. But how does that hurt, right? Because I'd mentioned earlier, food safety goes well beyond what we do in the facilities, right?
Right, but you know what? And this came up in our prep conversation, but the automakers, they want to make sure that people who buy cars have confidence in the safety of their cars, and yet they engage in conversations about airbags and seat belts and national highway transportation ratings and crash specifics and braking speeds and engine crush and all that kind of stuff. So if they can talk about elements of invisible threats, if you will, and being prepared for those with their cars and therefore how their cars are safe, why couldn't the food industry talk about invisible threats and protective measures and safety protocols, and therefore you know supporting this culture of how much safety they put into their products?
Exactly, right. I mean, and I think that's a great segue, right? Is that there are other industries out there that are doing a fantastic job of communicating safety, and as a result, they have improved, right? So fatalities from automotive wrecks have gone down significantly, right? It used to be, right? This sounds like a familiar story. It used to, every year it was around 75,000 or so deaths a year. Every single year you would see this, and then different campaigns started, right? And to your point. Um, there are car companies out there, Volvo, right, that they market directly toward how safe our cars are. And car companies, you see this on TV all the time, will show their cars being wrecked, right? Hey, here's our car flying into an obstacle at 40 miles an hour, right? Watch how the dummy is protected in this nice little cushy envelope of pillows that envelop the driver in this web of safety that will help protect you and your family, right? Buy our car. That's a competitive selling point.
Well, when food safety really kind of took on a great momentum back in the early 90s. Ralph Nader, who is famous for his exposés and writing into the auto industry, was looked at as someone to look for in terms of that advocacy and that kind of safety, even activism, within the food industry. And again, you see certain patterns over time that reappear. Recently, we've had conversations, though, I think shed a new light on this. You look at the recent concern over that pink sauce.
Mhm.
Um, right now, it's interesting because it was kind of a flash issue. Here's this person out of Miami who calls herself I'm a personal chef. I have no formal background in anything, but I'm a personal chef, so I know. Well, I'm a personal chef because I cook
You
for
are.
persons. But anyway, she makes this sauce. She really uses social media to make this go viral, and people were basically you know handing over $20 plus shipping and handling. So I think it was like $36 total to get this bottle of this sauce, and it was a bad experience. So many people were getting this, and they were questioning. And I've actually recently been able to talk to some social media influencers that were kind of involved in this. And when at first these social media influencers were being used, if you will, to really promote this product, and then all of a sudden they get this product and realize it's not what it was promised to be. People are questioning, well, wait a minute, it's not refrigerated. What about the milk content? Or it changed color, or what about temperature control? What about all these different questions? And in a live video, this woman, the chef who made this, Chef Pie, she goes by, uh, you know, was like, What's this have to do with the FDA? This is not. I'm not making any health claims. This has not a drug kind of thing." And it became this whole notion of she doesn't know what the F in FDA stands for. And then she made some claims about, "Oh, I'm meeting with the FDA and that kind of stuff, and we've never heard back from her," kind of thing. But in the world of social media, there is this so many conversations that took place and so many concerns. To me, that is an indicator. That's like a finger on the pulse, if you will, that if there was not a food safety culture that consumers saw themselves as being part of, they would not have asked a lot of those questions. They would not have
Mhm.
pressed that issue in terms of the food safety aspects. Even with viral videos and memes out there about food safety issues, again, that whole idea of person who creates the message, person who reads or you know uh, uh, interprets the message. No one's going to create these messages if they didn't think that their audience would understand what they're talking about. If you're
Right.
talking about E. coli and Chipotle, or you're talking about romaine lettuce or whatever. So there are ways for us to measure that there is a food safety culture purely within consumers, not just within industry. But it's very hard to measure. And I think that we're going to continue to find ways in which um, consumers, as their own entity, are more and more involved in the food safety conversation and starting to wonder why they're being left out of it for the most
Yeah.
part. Years ago, I was brought to speak before the Southwest Meat Association conference. And I was asked on stage, so what is the state of food safety education in public schools? Because our kids should be taught about food safety in public schools. And I was a high school teacher and I actually audited some of these programs. And I'm like, it's essentially zero. No one's taught food safety in school. I even found programs that, there were some students who took a semester long, uh, like a home ec kind of a class where they may be doing sewing and there may be some cooking. And the maximum I ever found was 3 days of instruction on food safety in all the programs that I looked at the high school and middle school level. And that's only for those students who took that one class, one semester, kind of a thing, because they had all their other classes and electives, kind of a thing. So you're talking a very small percentage of that school would
Yeah.
even have those 3 days. So anyway, the assumptions that the public schools are going to get these messages, well, those are not going to go anywhere because public school students are not learning about food safety. So where do
Right.
they learn about food safety? It's either from the food industry or at the home. I think that there are opportunities here where we could use conversations and messaging about food safety to really benefit consumers and industry at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so this is an interesting thing, right? If you work in the food industry in the U.S. and you're a quality assurance, food safety, these type of things, it's not something you went to school for, right? So I went to school and I was a microbiologist, right? A degree in cellular biology and physiology, right? Nothing to do necessarily with food safety directly. And then you have to learn this stuff on the fly. In Europe, you go to school, right, to become a quality food safety manager, right? And they teach you all those skills versus in the US, right, trying to learn this stuff on the fly. And maybe you're good at it, maybe you're not, right? So even within the industry, right, that educational piece isn't necessarily very good.
Well, again, because I work at a university, we've done these kind of market surveys, and one of the things we found over the last few years is that um, in in the 2000s, a lot of these jobs that previously had required a bachelor's degree were now requiring a graduate degree. That's
Mm-hmm.
gone back down to bachelor's degree. Many job applications now are looking for someone with a bachelor's degree and so many years of experience. Part of the problem is that when you look at a graduate degree, when you look at someone who has a master's degree in regulatory affairs or food science or food safety, that is very dedicated professional studies around that area. When you're looking at someone who has a bachelor's degree in it, overall, and I'm not trying to pick on any program, but you've got so many other courses that are being taken. I was just looking at a schedule of all the courses required for graduation for a university that offers a bachelor's of food science and quality assurance. And there's only like 3 or 4 classes that are specifically about food. The rest
Mm-hmm.
are just general, general undergraduate required courses. Now, mind you, those are important, but those are not going to focus on food. And
Mm-hmm.
specifically, what I noticed is there was nothing that talked about sanitation. There was no courses that talked about regulatory compliance. There were no courses that hit on so many critical factors that I think when industry goes to hire people, they need people with that background. And where do they get that background? And it's great to say, well, there's on the job training, but maybe we want people who have, some specific level of study and are qualified before they take those jobs, to be able to help make sure that those food safety programs and protocols are as strong and supported as can be. Um,
Yeah, I was thinking about in my head that interview, right? Because I mean, we've all hired people, right? And imagine an interview like that. Okay, well, all right, Darin, I see that you're here to apply for the food safety manager role. What experience do you have in this position? I just kind of figured I'd learn it on the fly as I as I come on board. No, right? It never works that way, except for in this field, which is absolutely bizarre. Darin,
well,
Darin
and
had.
there's oh, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, please. I was going to segue to Austin's question, but please go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, and there's also just, a lot of people think that I'm a food scientist. I'm like, I'm not a food scientist. I've got a background in science, but my doctorate is not in food science. Anyway, the conversations of late that look at the idea of so many degrees are different. You can't necessarily assume that if someone has this degree, they have everything they need to be successful in that specific role. And even going to conferences, talking with conference organizers, who's your target audience? They'll tell you that it's amazing how many people have the same job title but do different jobs, or do different jobs and have the same do the same job and have completely different job titles.
Mhm.
So there's no one consistency across industry, especially when you have very small companies and very large companies. There's no consistency in terms of job titles and in terms of degrees. That are out there. So it just becomes a bit more of a complicated landscape in terms of trying to find that best fit for an employee.
Yeah, and I see here that Wanda is going through a bout of what she has some food poisoning right now. So hopefully,
Oh no.
yeah, hopefully you feel better soon, Wanda. And yeah, if things get worse, definitely, as Robert's saying here, get to a doctor, right? Don't try and tough it out. Um, Austin had a question for you, Darin. So, what are the top three things that you feel consumers should have knowledge about concerning food safety?
That's good. Uh, One is I guess proper cooking and handling, obviously. Um, uh, and I have to admit, maybe it's because I'm getting older. I hate the fact that I have to get glasses to put my glasses on in order to read the fine print of, the most important thing to me is always the how long am I supposed to cook it and what temperature, and why is that always the smallest size font, kind of a thing. But I want to know about proper cooking and uh, how to properly store and how long to store the leftovers. That element of control in terms of like the kill steps, proper cooking and keep hot foods hot, cold foods cold, etc. I think
Mhm.
number two is ingredients and allergens and what needs to be known about that. And we saw that like with the pink sauce and when we talk about
Mhm.
food labelings and allergen labelings, things like that. Um, but I think that increasingly what consumers are asking more and more about, or at least should be asking more and more about, is a little bit of traceability. I don't necessarily know. I don't necessarily need to know personally. It was here, then it was here, then it was here, then it was here, kind of a situation. There's a lot of foods when you look at the food kits and the meal kits and things like that are just delivered to your home. And I don't do that. I have had a neighbor who gave me their meal kit, their boxed kit one time, but I don't do this. But I want to make sure that did it ever get above a temperature outside the danger zone? Was how long was it? From this stage to my door. We don't necessarily have the ability to measure those things. And as we look at food that's delivered by a third party entity from a grocery store or from a restaurant or directly from the manufacturer, the company, I think the consumers need to be able to have that kind of assurance that it was kept at the proper temperature, it was not outside of this range, it was not, even the idea of food being delivered from a grocery store or restaurant. Um, if I get it, if I order it and I don't get it for an hour and 45 minutes, is that because it wasn't ready to be picked up for an hour and 30 minutes and it's only been in transit for 15 minutes? Or was it ready? and then it's been an hour and 30 minutes since it was picked up and it's been sitting in some person's car, kind of a situation. So I think that level of if we're going to change our behaviors to have foods that are out of our control, like, mostly with delivery kind of stuff, that
Uh-huh.
we need to have better assurances in terms of that it wasn't taking too long and that it was kept at the safe temperature. And quite honestly, I would want to ask questions like, you know, was there a dog in the car and someone smoking, and if I'm a was it sitting next to peanuts? You hear some of these horror stories. There's a concern right now over the fact that a lot of these delivery people, they don't have to have any kind of certification whatsoever in terms of food safety, and yet, is it a liability for that restaurant or grocery store that last mile of their product is now in an unsafe situation?
Yeah.
Those are some of the considerations that, again, if we're not asking those questions now proactively, we're going to be asking a lot of those questions reactively when things start to go real bad.
Right. Yeah. Even, personal practices relative to shopping, right? Let's say that, oh, I'm going to go to Costco and get my shopping done first thing in the morning. And now I'm going to go run 2 or 3 hours worth of errands with all my food cooking in the trunk.
Oh, I was recently talking with an inspector who, she goes, "This, I wasn't actually on the job, but she went to one of those, they call them different names. There's grocery stores that are meant for restaurants, like it's
Oh, yeah.
cash and carry or restaurant supply kind of stuff." And she observed this guy bringing a cart out with a ton of food, including and like these little net bags of oysters and some oils and all these different foods. And she watched him, pull this cart to his van, opened the van. The guy was moving uh, gas containers and literally bags of fertilizer to the side inside his van, and then put all the food next to it. And she said that she asked him about that, and he goes, "Well, I have a bunch of trips to make, and so I want to make sure that I got the extra gas I needed, and the propane tanks, and the bark and the manure, and then I want to think about food safety, so I've got my food last, for the bar." And she's like just mind blown in terms of the fact that this guy thought it was okay to transport food next to the fertilizer and gas in his car. And of course, that the consumers, the people who will go to the bar and order that food, will have no idea that that ever took place.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean too, right? As food safety people, right? You're in the grocery store and you're walking around, and you see the little thermometer on the back of the coffin case with all the the raw chicken in there, and it's sitting around 60 degrees, and you're like, oh, right, right, and people are just buying it. It you want to go grab a manager at that point in time and say, hey, listen, oh yeah, that's been broke for a couple of days now. We're getting somebody in to fix that. Oh, really?
Well, I don't want to name the conference, but I was at a food safety conference. I've been to a lot of food safety conferences. I got sick at a food safety conference in Dubai. Recently, I was at a food safety conference, and a person went to an Indian restaurant and got sick while they were there at the conference. Had nothing to do with the conference. But I was at a conference once where there was a company with these little remote sensor temperature things, and they put it to show how it works. They put it into this refrigerator case that had like yogurts and milks and stuff for people, for attendees to be able to access. And what they found was that over the course of that day, it never got below 50 degrees inside that refrigerated case. And that's not good, And it
Mm.
took, they took it away the next day. But how many people at a food safety event, made the assumption that, of course, it must be at a proper temperature inside the refrigerator unit, but there was, again, there was no posted thermometer there to have people be able to check that. You would think that at a food safety conference, that the venue, if they were going to have these portable refrigerated units, would want to have a thermometer right there, such that when you open the door, you can see that thermometer and get that quality and food safety check there live. But they don't do that. But years ago, I was speaking at the food safety summit in Baltimore. This was when they had the riots and the National Guard called.
Remember that? Yes.
And I was on stage and I asked people how many people have ever been on their own at a restaurant and they saw something, could be hygiene, sanitation, whatever, something, and so many people raise their hands, right? They see this in their personal lives, right? And then I asked them to keep their hands up, um, but to put them down if they didn't say anything or do anything once they saw that. And
No.
yeah, it's amazing how even people in food safety is their job, don't necessarily report these things, and or have a conversation right then and there with a person in charge or a manager, whatever, at a restaurant or a grocery store when they see these things. And I've been in that situation where I've seen something and I go to say something, and I'll be quite honest with you, 99 times out of 100, it's sad that I have to say that there's been more than 100, but I would say 99 times out of 100, I am treated as the asshole.
Yeah.
How dare you question us? We are
Yeah. The rolling eyes.
professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, yes, we see that your hamburger is not cooked enough. It's very raw in the middle. Well, what do you use? I ask the manager. What do you use for temperature or time controls? To which the manager says, well, you got to understand, we cook 5 or 600 hamburgers a day. We can tell. Well, A,
You
you
can
can't
tell.
tell. You can't tell the temperature. You can't see it. You can't see that. And clearly it didn't work this time, kind of a thing. So don't treat me as the enemy when I'm trying to ask questions. And, whatever happened to the customer is always right,
Yeah.
except
Well,
when it
and
comes to questioning food safety practices.
yeah, well, I mean, this is a perfect segue back to what we talked about in the beginning, right? There's an automatic assumption that the consumer's full of crap, right? It's something else, or it's whatever. Here's a coupon, go away. And I mean, that's terrible, right? Austin made a good thing here. It's like, wouldn't it be great if there was some type of a temperature logger that you could put in there? Yes, they do exist, right? And the prices of these have been coming down a lot. And to circle back to your point, then, Darin, if I am a fresh meal company and I advertise and say we care about food safety so much that we have a temperature logger in our boxes. When you open that box, plug it into your computer, you can go online and it will tell you the exact temperature history. If that temperature gets above this temperature, contact us and we'll send you a new meal kit.
Sure. I've seen
Oh,
things where it's like there's a little temperature thing, and if the temperature ever got above it, it would turn red or something like that.
yeah.
I've seen even the idea of a QR code, and all you'd have to do is take your phone and look at the QR code, and it'll give you that temperature log of it, and you've got a specific, like a case number, and if it ever was out of spec and it's at your door, again, just send them that information, they'll replace it. I think that these are the kind of disruptions, if you will, the disruptors in the food industry that we need to start looking at. How can consumers be more informed, more able to have that more pertinent traceability of critical food safety information when they're trying to make the right choice, not only for themselves, but their family? I mean, then they realize that their families are more and more likely to have members of these vulnerable populations. And it's not, again, just taking the risk for yourself. We also realized that, when I was first learning about food safety was with Jack in the Box, and how many of those kids were under 2. My
Yeah.
son was 16 months old. He never ate a hamburger. He got sick from another person. There were like 150 kids in the hospital with that outbreak, and the majority of those kids never ate the hamburger. They got sick from an older sibling or a parent who ate the product, and
Oh.
and it was just an inconvenience for them. They were sick, but that person-to-person contact, because they weren't washing their hands, is what got their young toddlers sick. So we need to understand not only the vulnerable populations, but that it's not just eating the food, right? There's animal contact, there's person to person, there's waterborne contact. There's multiple ways in which people become impacted by food safety, and these bigger invisible threats. Not that we want to say I'm never going to eat food again, right? But we need to understand that, look, we don't say I'm never going to get in a car again. We know that there's viral videos, and if not on the nightly news and on the computer, about car crashes happening all the time. We know to put on our seatbelts, to put our kids in car seats. We know about all these different things, yet we still get in the car and we go about our things. We need to be that way in terms of the invisible threats with food. Take it the assumption that this could be the most vulnerable population, and essentially wear our seatbelts and drive with a proactive nature when it comes
Mhm.
to our food. So I don't want
Yeah.
to scare people away. I just think that we need to say, look, we can have consumers be involved in this conversation, because I think that consumers want to be more. Well, they want to be perceived more. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. Consumers
No,
want to be perceived as more
right.
than
They're
just
part.
canaries in the coal mine in
Oh,
the
I love
eyes
it.
of the food industry.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, nobody gets into their car and says, "Hey, I think I'm going to wear that seatbelt today because I feel like I'm going to have a crash." Right? No, you have to be proactive on these things. And to your point, nobody says, "Oh, okay, I'm not driving anymore. It's just way too risky." Um, there's risk in life, right? And you have to understand the context of those risks. And involving the consumers in that conversation is only going to help that
Yeah.
elevate that piece, right? Because even within food, right, there's different categories of risk. Is raw sushi riskier than other foods? Yes. Right. Are people aware of that? Well, they need to be, right? There's times I'll see people in sushi restaurants feeding raw salmon to kids in little car seats, hooked up to the table. And I'm just like, ooh, really? No, that's right.
Yeah.
And to your point, I'm not going to go up to them and go, you shouldn't be doing that, with your kid, right? They're going to look at me like, who the hell are you, right? Go away.
Yeah.
So that education needs to take place through those channels, and I think a lot of it is reactionary, as we pointed out earlier. And there's certain things that have kind of seeped in over time, right? So when I was a kid, right, mom would be making cookies, right, and mix up the cookie dough with the raw eggs and all these type of things. And man, eating a little bit of that raw cookie dough was a huge treat. Well, that then transferred over when companies started making prepared cookie dough, and people were eating the raw cookie dough, and we had big outbreaks associated with that. And now the message has got out, but it wasn't a direct message from industry, right? I don't recall anything along those lines. You may, but it was like, now it's pretty common knowledge that, oh, hey, ooh, don't eat that raw cookie dough. And you see that messaging on those tubes of the
Yeah, it
dough
says
in
it
the
says
store.
don't eat raw cookie dough. I
Yeah.
remember this is back in 1993, 1994. The governor of Washington State at the time. Uh, I sat down with him. This is after the outbreak, and we were talking about how the state had at the time they had mandatory minimum cooking temperatures for fast food restaurants or hamburgers, and we were talking about other policy. And he goes, like a side note, he's like, Darin, I got to tell you, I just had a conversation with my wife because my wife does all the cooking, and she knows that I love her meatloaf, and she'll get in there with the ground beef and the ground pork, and she puts her hands in there and kneads all with her hands, and then she licks all that raw meat off of her fingers, and I'm like trying to hold back that disgust, kind of thing, right? And
You're
but
like,
he's like, yeah, but because I had to have a conversation about her with maybe that's not the safest thing to do anymore, kind of a thing. We do have behavioral changes over time. There's the question over should you wash a chicken before you cook it. There's the conversations about do you cook a big thing of chili? Do you leave it out overnight so it cools down before you put in the refrigerator, or do you put it in the refrigerator right away? There are certain regional or age or time, distance, whatever kind of changes in food safety thoughts over time that we can all talk about. But ultimately, somehow some of these messages have just started to kind of fall flat lately in terms of the overall idea that there's this invisible danger. And yet, talking about some things we've already talked about, parents talk to their kids about looking both ways before they cross the street. Parents talk with their kids about why they got to put on their seatbelts. I'm not going to pick on you with your new dog, but there are parents that put their little dogs in seatbelts and car carriers and stuff when they're in the car and have these conversations about don't run out into the street with their dogs, right? Why
yeah,
don't we have these levels of conversations in terms of food safety in the home?
right.
Why do you need to wash your hands before you help mom in the kitchen or help dad unload the dishwasher or help dad with cooking dinner? Why don't we have these conversations about we need to put the food away right away rather than leaving it out and then watch our TV shows for a couple hours and then put the food leftovers away after dinner? Why don't we have these conversations about food safety and they're kind of finding their place of normalcy within the household, which would only then help us to make sure that we're keeping our families safe. That
Right.
should become more commonplace. I would like to see that more. And again, I think that the back to my original thesis, this idea that food safety culture needs to find a way to involve consumers more and more, because it's going to be proactive, it's going to be effective, and it's just quite honestly, it's just going to be the right thing to do.
Right. Well, and just like the car ads highlighting the safety of their vehicles, consumers are going to appreciate that, right? They're not going to lash out and say, well, we expect your food to be safe 100% of the time, right? That's not a reasonable response, and people won't do that. So, again, right? So, this conversation today, and thank you, Darin, this has been fantastic, was meant to stimulate a conversation. Do we have all the answers? Absolutely not. But this anecdotal conversations that take place at home just based upon knowledge you may or may not have, and it may not even be correct, is really kind of how food safety works at this point from the consumer's viewpoint, right? It's all kind of food safety by osmosis. But as industry and trade associations and regulatory agencies and government, right, we need to a better job getting these messages out, right? Because again, we are only managing food safety for a very small section of the process. And everything that goes on after it leaves our control impacts our brands and impacts our consumers. And it impacts us as consumers as well, right? We're part of this too. We're not separate from it. So hopefully this conversation has been helpful. I know I've enjoyed this, right? And we could easily talk about this for another hour, but everybody has busy Fridays, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us for this conversation. And whenever Darin is on, I mean, he's a super busy guy, and I'm always very grateful that he takes the time to come here. So Darin, thank you very much for being here. We
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
And thank you very much for having this conversation. And for the people who joined us, I hope, was it Wanda feels better, and Austin, good. I just saw Austin a couple weeks ago in Pittsburgh. Good to hear from you again. And I hope that everyone realizes that, I talk about the Herculean effort of food safety. The Herculean effort requires an enormous amount of work, strength, and courage. And I think it takes a lot of courage to do the work that we do. It takes courage to take time out of your day to watch or be a participant in activities and events like Food Safety Chat Live. And at the same time, I think it takes courage to be able to tell these stories and to involve consumers in this bigger food safety culture.
Yep, absolutely. So there was a question here earlier saying, hey, are you gonna be sharing this recording? So the answer to that is yes. So as part of my locals group on the membership side, you get access to all these past issues of these conversations, right? Which are a huge wealth of information. And we're approaching now, I think this is episode 90, Darin. So we're getting
Wow.
up there in episodes. So we're getting the messaging out, and this is part of it, right? So think about this, right? I think, Darin's given us a ton to think about here over the weekend and how we can help contribute to food safety. So we're all part of it. And again, guys, join us back here next Friday at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time where I'm at, 7 a.m. in the wee hours of the morning on the Pacific where Darin is located at. And we'll have the next food safety chat. And again, thank you, everybody. Your participation and comments are what make this so much fun. So thank you for being here, and we'll see you back here next week. So thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend. Appreciate it.